World War I, otherwise known as the Great War, lasted from 1914 to 1918. The estimated total number of military and civilian casualties, including the wounded, is around 40 million people. World War I was very different to any war prior because of the advancement in technology and weapons, which is reflected in the large number of casualties. World War I was a first for many things, including chemical weapons, gas masks, steel helmets, flamethrowers, tanks, aerial warfare, aircraft carriers, IQ tests, guide dogs, blood banks, filmed propaganda, the enlisting of women, and wireless communication, among many other things. The Western Front was a lot smaller in size compared to the Eastern Front. On the Western Front, the soldiers were able to dig trenches and block off an entire region, meaning the only way through would be to cross this area of trenches. This resulted in essentially a defensive stalemate across the Western Front. The Eastern Front covered such a huge area that trench warfare was futile, and therefore trench warfare played a much less significant role. Trenches in World War I were long, narrow and muddy. Typically, they were rife with disease and infection, and led to some soldiers getting a disease known as trench foot, which is caused by cold, wet and unsanitary conditions. The area between two opposing armies' trenches is known as no man's land. Occasionally, soldiers would cross no man's land in an attempt to attack the opposing trench, which was commonly known as going over the top. Men were ordered to climb out of their trench, carrying their weapons with bayonets attached, and make their way through the network of barbed wire, gunfire and shellfire. The goal was to reach the enemy's trench and seize their position. For the most part, these tactics were unsuccessful and resulted in extremely high amounts of casualties. The 1917 book, written by Arthur Guy MP, details his experience of going over the top and how harrowing his experience was. In chapter 11, Arthur describes, "Sharp whistle blasts rang out along the trench, and with a cheer men scrambled up the ladders. Bullets were cracking overhead, and occasionally a machine gun would rip and tear the top of a sandbag parapet. How I got up that ladder, I will never know. The first 10 feet out in front was agony. Then we passed through the lanes in our barbed wire. I knew I was running, but could feel no motion below the waist. Patches on the ground seemed to float to the rear, as if I were on a treadmill, and scenery were rushing past me." He then goes on to say, "A Tommy about 15 feet to my right front turned around and, looking in my direction, put his hand to his mouth and yelled something that I couldn't make out on account of the noise from the bursting shells. Then he coughed, stumbled and pitched forwards and laid still. His body seemed to float to the rear of me. I could hear sharp cracks in the air about me. These were caused by passing rifle bullets." A BBC documentary from the 1960s features interviews and eyewitness accounts of the First World War. In this interview, Joseph Murray, seaman, Royal Naval Division, described his account of going over the top, saying, "I asked God to help me as soon as I scrambled over the top, and that withering fire. Many men were killed as soon as they showed their heads and fell back into the trench. Poor old Lieutenant Commander Parsons only got a few yards." In this interview, Richard H. Tobin, NCO, Royal Naval Division, explained, "As soon as you get over the top, fear has left you, and its terror. You don't look really, you see. You don't hear, you listen." Germany signed the Armistice Agreement with the Allies on the 11th of November 1918, and the Great War came to an end. World War I was commonly known as the War to End All Wars, due to the devastation and slaughter it caused. The new technology and ways of fighting caused destruction on a scale that had never been previously seen. Remembrance Day is a memorial day where Commonwealth members commemorate the end of the First World War, and this takes place on the 11th of November every year. It's important that we remember the service and sacrifice of the brave men and women of World War I, lest we forget.